A racist cop pulls over a black man for a baseless suspicion, only to discover he's the director of internal affairs. As the truth unfolds, the officer panics, realizing his career might be over. But this is just the beginning. Nightfall draped Dallas, Texas, in a cloak of darkness, with only the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the empty roads. Marcus Bennett, 42, director of internal affairs for the Dallas Police Department, drove his black Cadillac CTS smoothly through the quiet streets, savoring a rare moment of peace after a long, grueling day. As he approached an intersection, the yellow light flickered to red, prompting him to slow down. But before he could exhale, flashing police lights erupted behind him, bathing the night in an eerie mix of red and blue. A piercing siren shattered the silence, its echoes bouncing off the deserted buildings. The lights reflected in his rearview mirror, painting a scene of impending confrontation. Marcus furrowed his brows. Something felt off. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was the beginning of a night he would never forget. Marcus took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel for a brief moment before releasing it. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Officer Ryan Calloway step out of his patrol car, exuding the presence of a man who thrived on control. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp, icy stare, Ryan moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to dominance. His right hand hovered near his holstered gun, not drawn, but close enough to send a clear message, a calculated display of power, a silent warning. Marcus calmly rolled down the window, his expression unreadable. License and registration. Ryan's voice was flat, clipped, more command than request. Marcus didn't rush, nor did he show any signs of unease. He met Ryan's gaze and asked evenly, "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" Ryan smirked, his eyes flickering over the sleek interior of the Cadillac CTS. He leaned in slightly, studying Marcus as if assessing a threat. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," he drawled, deliberately dragging out his words. Then after a pause, he added with a knowing smirk, "And this car doesn't exactly fit someone like you." The implication landed like a silent blow. Marcus understood instantly. This wasn't about a traffic violation. He tilted his head slightly, his expression impassive, his voice steady. "I didn't realize certain cars only belong to certain people, officer." Ryan's smirk faltered for half a second. He wasn't expecting that. He was used to nervous drivers fumbling through their documents, mumbling apologies. But Marcus? He was too calm, too sure of himself. Ryan wasn't done. He decided to shift gears, pressing further. "You're not from around here, are you?" Marcus recognized the trap immediately. There was no legal reason for the question. Ryan was testing him, looking for hesitation. "I live in Dallas." His response was firm, offering nothing more. "Where are you headed this late?" Another probing question, another attempt to establish control. Marcus let the silence stretch just a fraction longer than necessary before replying smoothly, "Home." Ryan's smirk returned, but this time it was colder, more calculated. Something about Marcus was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. The usual fear, the usual nervousness, it wasn't there, and that irritated him. Ryan took a deliberate step closer, invading Marcus's personal space. The tension thickened. "Home, huh?" Ryan repeated, voice laced with suspicion. "Funny, you don't look like someone just heading home." His gaze flickered over Marcus's tailored suit, polished dress shoes, and the Rolex glinting on his wrist. Still no fear, still no hesitation. Ryan's irritation deepened, morphing into something closer to frustration. He wanted control. He wanted Marcus to feel small, to feel powerless, and Marcus wasn't giving him that. Slowly, deliberately, Ryan rested his palm on the grip of his gun, not drawing it, but making sure Marcus saw it. "Step out of the car." The words were ice cold. The fake pleasantries were gone. Marcus didn't move right away. He simply held Ryan's gaze, unwavering. He could see it now. Ryan was losing patience. And this was the moment where everything would begin to spiral out of control. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenching for a brief second before he exhaled slowly. Through the rearview mirror, he watched as Officer Ryan Calloway squared his shoulders and approached with an air of dominance. His right hand hovered near his holstered gun, not drawn, but positioned as a silent threat. "Step out of the car. Hands on the hood." Ryan's voice was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus remained still, his posture unshaken. His mind worked quickly. This wasn't about a traffic violation anymore. "Is there a reason I need to step out, officer?" His voice was steady, controlled but sharp. Ryan smirked, his fingers tapping against the safety of his gun before flicking it off with deliberate slowness. I have reason to believe you might be carrying a weapon illegally. Step out now, or I'll take further action. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus understood exactly what was happening. This was about power, about control, and Ryan wanted to make it clear who was in charge. There were only two ways this could go. Either Marcus complied and let Ryan push his authority further, or he resisted and gave him an excuse to escalate. Marcus chose a third option. He moved deliberately, unhurried. His hand reached for the door handle, pushing it open with practiced ease. Not too fast, not too slow. Controlled. When he stood, he did so with an unshaken presence, meeting Ryan's gaze with an unreadable expression. There was no fear, no hesitation. And that, more than anything, infuriated Ryan. Turn around, hands on the hood. Marcus complied, his movements calm, precise. Ryan took a step closer, his breath just inches from Marcus's ear. His voice dropped into a low, taunting growl. You seem real comfortable with all of this. Not nervous like the others, huh? Marcus said nothing. He wouldn't engage in a game designed to make him react. Ryan's grip tightened. He wanted Marcus to flinch, to make a mistake, so he shoved him, hard. Marcus didn't move, didn't tense up, didn't give Ryan the satisfaction. That more than anything made Ryan furious. With unnecessary force, Ryan began patting him down. It wasn't a search, it was an assertion of power. His hands pressed harder than they needed to, lingering in places longer than necessary, but Marcus remained composed. He could feel Ryan's frustration building with each passing second. This wasn't going the way he wanted. And when Ryan finally stepped back, his expression darkened. He had found nothing. He had expected Marcus to break, to react, to give him something, anything to justify what he was doing. But Marcus had given him nothing. Ryan clenched his jaw. He had two options: back off or double down. He chose the latter. You seem to know a lot about police procedures, Ryan sneered. You got something to hide? Slowly, Marcus turned his head just enough to meet Ryan's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but the look in his eyes was razor sharp. And in that moment, Ryan felt it. Something was off. Marcus wasn't acting like a man under pressure. He was acting like a man who knew exactly what was coming next. And that realization sent a chill down Ryan's spine. Ryan straightened after his rough, unnecessary search, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought he had Marcus exactly where he wanted him, cornered, powerless. But then he saw it, a look sharper than steel. Marcus wasn't intimidated. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. And that made Ryan furious. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper, his breath almost brushing against Marcus's ear. Guys like you always think you're smarter than the cops, don't you? Marcus remained still, unwavering. Ryan's jaw tightened. He wanted a reaction. He needed it. You think you can talk your way out of this? Marcus finally moved. He lifted his head just slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto Ryan like a blade. No, Marcus said, his voice slow, deliberate. I don't think that, but I do know exactly how cops are supposed to do their job. Ryan froze. There was something in the way Marcus said it, something cold, something unnervingly sure. And then Marcus moved his hand, slowly, deliberately. His fingers reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Ryan's instinct screamed. His hand flew to his gun, gripping the holster half a second away from drawing. But Marcus wasn't pulling a weapon. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet. Ryan's brow furrowed, his fingers tightening on his gun, and then Marcus flipped it open. A gleaming badge caught the glow of the streetlights. Ryan's stomach dropped. The words on it hit him like a freight train. Director of Internal Affairs, Dallas Police Department. Silence. The street noise faded. Even the other officers who had been watching, waiting, stiffened, their confidence evaporating in an instant. Ryan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hand still resting on his gun now felt like it was made of lead. This was the man who oversaw officer conduct. This was the man who decided which cops kept their jobs and which ones didn't. And Ryan had just made the worst mistake of his career. Marcus didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. His expression remained unreadable, his eyes unyielding. And then he spoke. His voice was steady, deep, absolute. I oversee officer conduct. He let that sink in, watching as Ryan's confidence crumbled before him. And I just witnessed a textbook example of abuse of power. Ryan felt his pulse hammering against his skull. His mind scrambled for an excuse, for a way out. But there wasn't one. There was no getting out of this. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a crushing force. He had thought he was in control, but now he was the one cornered. Marcus took a step back, his hand sliding his wallet back into his jacket, never once breaking eye contact. And Ryan? Ryan stood frozen, stripped of his authority in the span of a single moment. The game had changed, and Marcus wasn't finished yet. Ryan stood frozen, his face drained of color, as if all the blood had been sucked from his body. He opened his mouth about to say something, but then stopped himself. There was nothing he could say. He had lost control. That feeling of power, of dominance, of forcing someone to submit, gone in an instant, and he hated it. Marcus didn't have to yell. He didn't have to threaten. He didn't have to do anything but stand there. His silence, his composure, that's what made Ryan feel suffocated. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice razor sharp, ice cold. "Give me back my documents and be ready for my call tomorrow." Ryan's stomach twisted. Those words hit him like a gut punch, not because he feared Marcus at this moment, but because he feared what came next. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, when Marcus wouldn't just be a man standing in front of him in the dark, he would be the director of internal affairs, sitting at his desk, reviewing files, deciding who deserved to keep their badge and who didn't. Ryan swallowed hard. His fingers clenched Marcus's license and registration, as if they suddenly weighed 10 times heavier. Finally, he handed them back, his hand shaking slightly. Marcus took them without a word, without a single sign of urgency. Then he looked straight at Ryan, a look that lasted just long enough to burn itself into Ryan's memory. Before stepping back into his car, Marcus left him with one final statement, slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of an undeniable truth. "Remember this, officer. Your badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." Ryan didn't move, didn't respond. Marcus opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The deep rumble of the Cadillac CTS shattered the eerie silence. He pressed the gas. The car glided down the empty street, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a man who had just felt his power slip through his fingers. Ryan still stood there, unmoving, unsure of how long. He wanted to believe this wasn't over, but deep down he knew. The game had changed, and he wasn't in control anymore. The morning air in Dallas was quieter than usual, but inside the Office of Internal Affairs, the tension was palpable. Marcus Bennett sat at his desk, his eyes locked on the open file before him. Name: Ryan Calloway. Page after page told a familiar story, a pattern repeated too many times. Complaints of racial profiling, abuse of power during traffic stops, unjustified threats against civilians. All of them had existed for years, and yet no one had ever truly held him accountable, until now. Marcus picked up his phone, dialed a number, and waited only a few seconds before a deep voice answered. "Bennett." Chief Daniel Carter, a seasoned officer, a tough leader, not a bad man, but a man used to the way things worked. Marcus didn't waste time. "We need to talk. My office. This morning, I have a proposal you can't ignore." There was a pause, then Carter responded. 10 o'clock. I'll be there." At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., Chief Carter walked into Marcus's office. Marcus slid Calloway's file across the desk. "This needs to end. Now." Carter flipped through the documents, his brows furrowing at the reports. "I know about these." He exhaled. "But you know how the system works. These weren't enough before." Marcus leaned back, his voice calm but unrelenting. "Then we changed the system." Carter was silent, and he knew Marcus was right. Finally, he nodded. "What's your plan?" "We hold a hearing, not just for Calloway, but for the entire disciplinary system. We tear it apart if we have to." Carter sighed. "You're going to make a lot of enemies." Marcus didn't blink. "Then let them hate me." 3 days later, the hearing began. The room was packed, eyes watching, murmurs spreading. Ryan Calloway sat stiffly at the defendant's table, his fingers clenched. When the evidence was presented, witness testimonies, audio recordings, years of ignored complaints, his excuses collapsed. This time, no one could turn a blind eye. Chief Carter delivered the ruling immediately. Ryan Calloway was suspended from duty, effective immediately. But Marcus knew this wasn't just about one man. He wasn't the disease. He was just a symptom of a broken system, and the reform wouldn't stop here. As Marcus stepped out of the hearing room, he looked up at the bright Texas sky. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about changing the entire system. And this was only the beginning. Bright stage lights illuminated the dark wood podium, casting a sharp contrast against the vast conference hall. The Dallas Police Department's auditorium was packed. Officers, officials, journalists, and citizens, all watching, all waiting. Marcus Bennett stood firm, his presence commanding yet measured. His eyes scanned the room, reading the mix of skepticism, anticipation, and cautious hope. Some were ready to resist, Some yearned for real change, but all of them were listening. Adjusting the microphone, he took a deep breath and began, his voice steady, deep, and unwavering. Justice is not just about punishing the bad. His words cut through the silence. Justice is ensuring that those who enforce the law are also held accountable to it. The air in the room grew heavier. We cannot demand respect if we do not act in a way that earns it. We cannot ask the public to trust us if we do nothing to prove we are worthy of that trust. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze, but Marcus did not stop. Power is not a weapon to be wielded over others. It is a responsibility. And if anyone forgets that, he paused, his gaze sweeping across the entire room, then they do not deserve to wear this badge. A ripple of applause broke the silence, soft at first, then building, strong and unwavering. Marcus did not smile. This wasn't a speech for praise. It was a battle cry against what had been tolerated for too long. He nodded slightly, stepped away from the podium, and walked off the stage. The applause continued, echoing through the hall, but Marcus never looked back. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was time for action. Power cannot be abused without consequence. Justice is not for the few. It must be fair for all.